Chapter 4. Monday. I just don't understand, Dr. Jameson. How could I have breast cancer? I'm so young. Kat smiled sympathetically at Lindsay, the young woman across from her. 26 was awfully young to have breast cancer, but Kat had checked the results twice just to be sure. It is rare in someone your age, but there are some things that could have raised your risks. Do you mind if I ask you some questions? Lindsay shrugged, but her eyes still swam with questions. Can't hurt, I suppose. Will it help you know how to treat me? It might. Kat chose her words carefully. As an oncologist, she had learned long ago not to give too much hope until she knew how the cancer was responding. She looked down at the list of risks on her iPad. She could cross off obesity and age. Lindsay was not overweight, nor was she over the age of 50. Do you remember what age you were when you first got your period? Lindsay's eyes squeezed shut, sending tiny crow's feet lines out from the corners. It would be years before the lines resided there permanently, but Kat could see where they would lay. 13, I think. Before high school, for sure. So after 12, probably. She moved to the next risk. Have you ever been on birth control pills? Kat knew from the medical intake form that Lindsay wasn't on them currently, but she was a new patient to Kat. Yeah, in high school and the first few years of college, probably 6 years total until I switched to the shot. Do the pills increase the risk of breast cancer? Kat nodded as she marked that risk factor. Some of them can. Do you remember which ones you were on? Lindsay shook her head. No, that was 4 years ago. Can you find out from my old doctor, though? Of course. How about drinking? Do you drink alcohol on a regular basis? Lindsay was still in college pursuing a master's, so Kat had no doubt she drank. The question was, how much? Define regular. Lindsay bit her lip and shifted in the chair. The question obviously hit a little close to home. Do you have a drink every day? Lindsay's eyes slid to the side. Not every day. Okay, and when you drink, how many do you have? Are you saying alcohol increases the risk too? A note of anger laced Lindsay's voice as if she didn't believe what Kat was suggesting. It does, depending on how much and how often you drink. So how many do you have when you drink? Kat took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm. She'd been in college once. Never been a big drinker, but she'd seen plenty of girls who were. Even though it was regrettable, she knew it was a large part of college life, especially for those involved in sororities or fraternities. Lindsay's eyes dropped to her arm and followed her right hand as it scratched absently at her left arm. I don't know, 2 or 3, maybe. More if it's a party, but those are only on weekends. 2 or 3 a day? The admission saddened Kat, but she could believe it from the number of patients she saw who had anxiety disorders. What did these kids have to be so anxious about? Well, a lot, actually. But she doubted most of them knew that angels and demons were all around them and preparing for a war. Kat marked the wristbox and sighed as she read the next one. Somehow, she just knew Lindsay's answer would be yes, and if she was bothered by the alcohol question, this certainly wouldn't go over any better. Have you terminated any pregnancies? Lindsay's head snapped up. Terminated? You mean like abortions? Are you allowed to ask me that? Do I have to answer? No, Kat said with a sigh as she tapped the risk factor. You don't have to answer the question, but I am trying to help you here, Lindsay. Though there are conflicting opinions, there have been studies that show a link between breast cancer and abortions. I'm not saying that's the cause here, but it is a standard medical question. You can choose not to answer it, but being open about your medical history allows me to diagnose and treat you properly. Fire burned out of Lindsay's eyes as she grabbed her purse from the floor and stood. What are you, some kind of religious nut? You're supposed to be curing my cancer, not pushing your morality on me. I wasn't. But Kat knew it was too late. Lindsay was already at the door of her office, and with an exaggerated yank, she flung the door open and marched into the hall. Great. No doubt she would be hearing from her supervisor later about this. Kat rubbed a hand across her forehead. Perhaps she should have just skipped the question. She certainly didn't need to be building walls between herself and others. Lindsay hadn't had the glow around her, but did that mean she was already saved? Or that she couldn't be saved? Kat refused to believe people couldn't be saved, but she had no idea why some people had the glow and others didn't. Once again, she wished she had been thinking clearly when Micah told her about all of this. There was so much she didn't know, and she feared she was making things worse stumbling around in the dark. With a sigh, Kat dropped her head to her hands. Perhaps a moment of prayer would give her some clarity and the strength to follow up on the next patient. Jordan squared her shoulders and inhaled deeply as she pulled open the front door of the pregnancy center. This would be her first day on the job here, and while she was excited, she was also a little nervous. She'd worked at a pregnancy center back in Texas from the day she decided to put her son up for adoption, and she enjoyed the work. But back there, she'd had visions of the women she would see that day before they even entered her office. But there'd been no vision today. In fact, she'd had no vision since the one of the baby yesterday, so she had no idea what to expect. The reception area of the center was warm and inviting. Neutral colors accented with blue and pink pillows on the comfy couches created a homey atmosphere. Even the receptionist desk added to the ambiance instead of detracting from it. "Can I help you?" the woman behind the desk asked. She was young-looking, though older than Jordan, late 20s maybe. Her blonde hair was pulled up in a loose bun, and a pin was wedged between her ear and head. "Hi, I'm Jordan Wright. I'm a transfer from Texas. It's my first day." A smile lit up the woman's face. "Jordan, hi, I'm Lana. Let me ring Carla, the boss, for you, and she'll get you set up." Jordan nodded and took a seat next to a woman with a growing belly on the beige couch. But it wasn't long before a dark-skinned woman with beautiful curls opened the door and called her back. "Jordan, I'm Carla." She extended a slender hand, which Jordan shook. "Grace told me all about you. Let me show you to your office." "Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to work here on such short notice. I really enjoyed working for Grace and appreciated that she was willing to vouch for me." Grace had been her boss back in Texas, and when Jordan had told her she had to go to Washington State for an undetermined amount of time, Grace had reached out to Carla and secured her this job. The smile that Carla flashed could have lit up a dark room. "We are always in need of help here. There are so many women who need us, but we are so few." She opened the door to a small and very bare office. It held only a desk, computer, phone, and guest chairs. "I'm sorry it's not more, but you can make it your own." Jordan shook her head. "This is perfect. I don't need bells and whistles, just a comfortable place to share my heart." "I'll let you get situated then and bring in the papers I need you to sign. Our program is the same one you used in Texas, and I've left log-on credentials in the top drawer. Go ahead and get logged in. You can start seeing clients after lunch." Jordan thanked Carla and crossed to the desk. Her office back in Texas had pictures of all the women she had helped and their babies. She wished she had remembered to bring some with her so this place didn't feel so sterile, but she would start fresh. Surely she would acquire some to begin a wall here as well. Raven pulled into the gym parking lot and turned off her Jeep. She hoped she would get some time with Jason before class. Her plan had been to turn her charm on him yesterday during the personal training session, but he seemed determined to push her and not chat. Probably that had something to do with his first client staying late and the client after her coming in early. They'd only had a few minutes alone, but Raven was determined to find some time with him today. She checked her appearance in the mirror. The workout would undo the masterpiece she had worked so hard on, but that was fine. She'd have a few minutes to turn his head, as long as the new girl wasn't around. Kat. The name felt dirty in her mouth, and she rolled her eyes. The girl had come in a week ago with her fresh face and sparkly smile, and she'd turned Jason's eye. He'd spent more time critiquing her on the bags lately than he ever had speaking with Raven, and it had to stop. She glanced one more time in the mirror before flipping up the visor, but her hand paused. What the heck was that? Raven whipped around, but there was nothing there. She could have sworn she had seen a black shape move past her window, but nothing was in the car. Nerves. It was probably nerves. With Kat in the picture, Raven would have to try harder to entice Jason, and she wasn't used to having to try so hard. She knew she was pretty. With her thin figure, long dark hair, and ice blue eyes, she attracted men's attention. Had since she was 12, when her stepfather's eyes wandered to her more than they should have. That had been the worst year of her life, but she'd learned something. She'd learned how to use her assets to get what she wanted from men. And now she wanted Jason, but he was proving harder to charm. There was nothing extremely special about Jason, except that he was different from her normal tastes. He wasn't wealthy, but his physical prowess was impressive. Mostly, though, she figured it was the challenge he was presenting. Raven generally just had to bat her eyes and drop a few suggestive hints to get what she wanted. But that had become boring and predictable. So, when Jason didn't seem affected by her usual antics, the challenge of winning him had become exciting. She didn't know if it was because he worked at the gym and didn't like to mix business with pleasure, or if there was another reason. But once she set her mind on something, she didn't let it go. And she wasn't going to let him go either. As she opened the car door and stepped out, a weird feeling of unease, like cold fingertips on bare flesh, trickled up her arms. Raven shivered and glanced around, but no one else was even in the parking lot. She had arrived early in hopes of seeing Jason, and only 3 other cars were even in the lot. There was a blue truck, a green Mustang, and a gold Honda. All were empty. But Raven couldn't shake the feeling that someone else, or something else, was out here with her. She scoured the lot one more time, but saw nothing. No person, no animal, and certainly no black shape. She was losing it. Her sleep was to blame. She just knew it. Even with the sleeping pills last night, her sleep had been restless, and she'd woken up exhausted and scared, just like the last few mornings. Her dreams appeared to be getting even more vivid, though she still couldn't recall them. Tiny pieces would flicker briefly in her mind before blowing out like a candle, and all she could ever remember was that she'd been scared and confused, much like now. But they were just feelings. They meant nothing. With a final glance around the parking lot, Raven shouldered her bag, locked her car, and headed into the gym. Brian, the owner, sat behind the desk, his cell phone plastered to his ear. Lately, it seemed like that's all he did, talk on the phone. Supposedly, he was working on getting the next fight card ready, but all Raven knew was that she was paying for instruction and often didn't get it because he had to run off to answer a call. As far as she was concerned, Brian either needed to hire more instructors or someone to organize his fight card so he could instruct. He nodded as she passed, and she flashed him a small wave. Brian wasn't her concern right now. Her eyes scoured the room for Jason, but he wasn't in the main room. The weight room, then? That would actually be better. It was smaller there, and she could use the excuse of asking him to show her how to lift properly to engage him. She stuck her head into the weight room and smiled as she saw Jason stacking weights on the bench press. Perfect. She would change quickly and then return to work her magic. 5 minutes later, she was changed and heading back toward the weight room. "Hey, you," she said to Jason as she entered. "I was looking for you." The room was small and packed full of equipment. Because the gym had originally been a garage and a butcher shop before that, it wasn't really built for a weight room. That didn't keep Brian, however, from picking up every piece of used equipment he could find and shoving it in the room. Raven knew he used some of it, but dust littered some of the older pieces, and she wondered why Brian kept them in the room. Jason looked up from the chest press bench, and she bit her lip to keep from smiling as his eyes took in her tight leggings and tank. She could tell he appreciated the view. "Hey, Raven, what can I do for you?" "Well, I really want to work on my chest muscles, but I haven't lifted in a long time. I was hoping you could tell me what might be the best place to start." Raven pushed her lower lip out in the faintest pout and batted her eyes at him. Sure. The bench press is pretty good for that, and I just finished. Let me take the weights off, and we'll see how you do at the bar." He turned his back to her as he began removing the large circular weights from the bar. "I'm sure I can handle some weight." Raven was aiming for a light, teasing tone, but it bothered her that Jason thought she was too weak to lift a bar with weights. "I'm not a total newbie." Men often underestimated her, but she hadn't thought he'd been like that, especially after she'd survived his one-on-one training yesterday. He pulled a 35-pound weight off the bar and leaned it against the wall before turning to her. I didn't say you were, but if you haven't lifted in a while, the best place to start is with the bar. Then we can see how easy it is and adjust from there. Raven wanted to argue, but she knew that wouldn't earn her any bonus points with him, and the point was to win him over, not win the argument. Besides, she was enjoying watching his muscles as he moved the weights. She tugged on a strand of hair and pouted her lips slightly. Okay, you're the trainer. I'm sure you know best. He raised an eyebrow at her as if he wasn't sure if she were telling the truth or attempting to stroke his ego by telling him what he wanted to hear. Yeah, I am. After pulling the weight off the other side, he patted the bench. Okay, come lie down here. Raven smiled as she lay back on the bench. Like this? She asked, placing her hands on the bar. Yes, like that. Now push the bar up and let's see if you can do a complete rep. He kept his hands under the bar as she pushed it up and lowered it to her chest before placing it back in the holders. See, I told you I'm not a newbie. A slight smile pulled at his lips and he rolled his eyes. Okay, you're right. Let me add 10 pounds on. He moved toward the weight rack with careful steps and grabbed 2 5-pound weights. Then he added one to each side. Let's try this. Raven was surprised at how much pressure 10 pounds added, but she tried not to show it on her face as she lowered the bar and then pressed it up again. So, this new girl, Kat, what do you think of her? Jason asked. Anger surged through Raven and she forced herself to focus on the rep so she didn't drop the bar and crush herself. Was he really asking her about some other girl? She gritted her teeth and forced her voice to stay even and not betray the venom she was brewing inside. I don't know. She seems odd. He nodded, but his eyes weren't on her. They were focused on something Raven couldn't see. Something not even in the room. Was he picturing Kat's face? Yeah, odd. I can see that. She told me my life had purpose last week. It was so weird because I'd been thinking about how it didn't. How this was all I had. He gestured around the small room. No wife, no dog, no real savings. Just the gym and my bartending gig on weekends. You don't think that's enough? Raven didn't think it was enough, especially not for someone in his 30s. But she wasn't planning to settle down with Jason. She just wanted to have a little fun and let off some steam. In fact, Raven doubted she would ever settle down. Letting a man be in charge of her was not something she ever wanted to do. But that didn't mean she couldn't find some enjoyment along the way. He looked down at her. No, I don't. I'm almost 35, Raven, and while I love my job, this was not how I saw myself growing up. I know I probably look like I have it together, but I'm a mess. I drink every night, and I sleep until noon or later. It was like Kat saw all of that and knew just what to say to me, even though she barely knows me. Yeah, that is weird. Raven pursed her lips together. If Kat could read people that well, winning Jason's attention back might be harder than she thought. You think she's clairvoyant or something? I don't know, he said. Maybe she's just really good at reading people. But it was definitely strange. Nice, but strange. Raven didn't like the tone his voice had taken or the faraway gleam in his eyes. She needed to figure out who this cat girl was and stop her before she captivated Jason completely.